As he began to rush at me, the first thing that I noticed was that he wasn't actually running. Instead, it was as if the water beneath him simply grasped hold of him, beginning to propel him forward like a rocket, drawn on a massive wave of water that moved more rapidly than it had any right to. As he came rushing at me, I changed the balls of the flow of liquid steel around me into steel spheres, a few dozen of them at first, launching them out in a single burst, a scatter shot. As they launched out in his direction, his movement quickly shifted, suddenly pulling to a complete stop as he waved a single arm up, and a wall of water projected itself between my projectiles and him. And just as quickly as the wall of water emerged, bursting forward from the ground, it suddenly hardened itself into ice, freezing solid in an instant as my projectiles slammed into it, pieces of ice tearing themselves out of the form, but they didn't break through. In the very next instant, the entire wall shattered, firing out at me in a rain of ice shards, moving so fast that it blasted me right off my feet. I went sailing back, at least a few dozen feet, sliding across the ground, splashing through the water before pulling myself back to my feet, just in time to see a swirling torrent of water heading in my direction, but not fast enough to do anything about it, as it ripped me out of my stationary position, consuming me entirely. I suddenly began to feel myself swirling wildly in that torrent of water, being carried away somewhere, before feeling a massive impact. As the water around me finally seemed to subside, I found myself cratered into a wall, painfully slammed into it, as chunks of it had torn themselves away. As the water dissipated, streams of it ran out of my armor and the cracks in the wall of the canal that we were in, destroying yet another series of tags laid into it. "You better hope that's not the best you can do," I heard Hydroshock's voice exclaim as I looked out to see him standing there, a torrent of water starting to swirl around him. "You'd better not take it easy on me. I'm not a chump like these other guys. This is a fight between men. I expect you to give it your best. And just so you know, water is one of the most adaptable things in existence. One could almost say water is life itself. It changes, adapts depending on its environment. You can find it basically anywhere, even on other worlds. There is always water. It's in the air you breathe. It's what you drink to survive. It's in the ice that cools your drink. No matter the condition, there is always water, because water is the most adaptable of all elements, and the most quintessential to life. You'll find that when the full power of water is brought to bear, it's best to batten down your damn hatches. If you thought this was going to be an easy fight, you were sadly mistaken," he said as he raised one of his hands, and a massive torrent of water began to build into a sphere beside him, pulling from the ceiling that he had created, the floor beneath him, and the torrents around him. A massive sphere, more than a dozen foot across, formed itself as he aimed his hand in its direction, and with a clutching of his fist, the entire thing shrunk down, suddenly compressing into a tiny ball no bigger than a softball. "If I were you, I'd move," he exclaimed as he pointed in my direction, as suddenly a controlled stream of water, like a laser beam, shot out of that sphere, moving at bullet speed, probably faster, tearing into the wall beside me and streaking in my direction as I kicked off of the wall, just clearing over it as it streaked by, leaving a massive cut into the stone wall behind me, and the entire thing seemed to collapse as if he had cut all the way through it, feet into that concrete wall, before the sphere finally dissipated down to nothing. When you apply massive pressure to water and force it to move extraordinarily fast, it'll cut through basically anything. That includes steel. So if you were counting on that armor to be a solid protection, I assure you you're gonna be wrong. You get hit by one of those, and you're a dead man, he said as I made contact with the ground, splashing down inside of the watery stream that had become our battlefield, as the liquid steel finally gathered itself around me again. Okay then, Hydra Shock, have it your way, I exclaimed, as large amounts of liquid steel began to attach themselves to my armor, flowing out, forming massive chains, with claw-like grips at the end of them, protruding from my back, shoulders, and arms, as the rest of this liquid steel continued to swirl around me. You wanna fight? You got it, I said as I rushed in his direction, forming liquid steel pressers, the same as I used when I was fighting with Rebecca. It was a little bit more difficult using them without Spirit doing all the work, but they were still useful. I remembered the process, and just like that, the battle started in true form. Clashing back and forward, I'd lash out at him with the chains, balls and spikes of liquid steel, cannonballs attempting to shatter through his defenses, forming barriers to protect myself against large tornadoes of water that would rush in my direction. Even when I formed defenses, the water beating against the metal was still bracing. I could feel the force vibrating through the steel. Hydra Shock's attacks were furious, his movements almost untrackable, unreadable. Not only did he move across the water, but through it. The water itself would seem to spring to life whenever he was in danger of getting hit by something, as if it would just pick itself up and carry him out of the range of my attacks. For him, attack and defense almost seemed like the same thing. I've fought other symbiote users, but this guy was insane. It felt near impossible to hit him. All the while, he launched what seemed like a never-ending barrage of attacks. Giant balls of ice spikes, tundras of water, the style of attack always shifting and changing. I would reach my steel chains out to grasp at him, only to find a massive wall of ice blocking me, propel a rapid-fire round of steel orbs to machine gun the entire area he was in, only for massive clouds of steam and fog to swirl up out of nowhere, completely obscuring any visual contact, filling the space as he disappeared, only to reappear somewhere else, pulling himself up and down, left and right, in every direction through streams of water, emerging just as fast as he disappeared. He even managed to land a hit with one of those high-pressure water shots that cut through the wall before. I managed to raise a defense for it, creating a barrier to separate me from him. As that stream of water tore into the steel, I found that my barrier was enough to defend me, but he was tearing into the steel nonetheless. The strength of the liquid steel was extraordinary, and he was still cutting into it. And the fight continued like that, for I don't know how long. It felt like forever, or just a few moments. I really couldn't tell the difference. Every single moment was spent absolutely on edge. I had no time for anything, not to keep track of time, to worry about who was winning or losing. To be honest, I couldn't tell. If I were to place it, I'd say that we were evenly matched. Just a never-ending back and forth struggle between the two. It was relentless. Finally, as I formed a massive cannonball, firing it out in his direction as he blocked with a massive wall of ice again, and I began to pull the cannonball back, I shouted out to him, "Hydra Shock," I said, as I stood there, still not letting my guard down, making sure to stay on Razor's edge just in case. "Why are you with them?" I exclaimed, staring across to him, as he finally stayed still for a moment, staring me down, but just like me, staying right there, on the Razor's edge, ready for anything. "Why do you ask?" Hydra Shock replied. "Those guys, they don't seem to fit you at all." I mean, sure you dress a bit thuggish, but your character, or the fact that you seem to have character, separates you. You don't seem like them at all. All this talk of honor, and all the other things you said, if anything, you seem like a decent guy. So why are you taking up sides with them? I just don't get it. I told you before, Hydroshock replied. A real man does what he has to do. I may have honor, but honor alone won't put food on my table. It won't protect the people I care about. This world has become a sad place for men with honor. It's not enough to sustain you. Once upon a time, a man could live and die by honor proudly. But in this day and age, men of true honor don't have any value. Everyone just wants you to be their lapdog, tote that box, work that factory line, sit in your cubicle and type. All for basically next to nothing. Even if you bother getting a college education, in the end you still end up pulling back scraps, struggling your whole life for nothing more than a pittance. I told you before, a man's nothing without dreams. I have no intentions of living my life as nobody, achieving nothing. When they first came to me, what they offered was power. The power to achieve what I wanted to. The strength to get what I needed to achieve my goals. I don't really give a crap about the Black Dog Syndicate or their plans. I'm just using them for my own goals. That's it. The moment I can find a way to crawl off from underneath that little twit Becky's finger, I assure you I'm going to. I'm just looking for the door.